Man, Woman, and the Interregnum Tyrans. By N.D. Wallace Swan. In what I call the postmodern interregnum tyrants, there is an ever-expanding and unhealthy conflict between the sexes. This gulf must be closed, and if it is unnaturally prevented from doing so, it will bring continuous disaster. Men and women need each other in proper balance, to regulate their essential being, both physically and spiritually. What is it which divides us from each other? What must be done or undone? In physics, there is a force that attracts atoms to each other based on the prevalence of electrons on a particular side of the atom, which, though negatively charged, weakly attract a place of electron prevalence to a side of electron in frequency. This, however, only becomes noticeable in absence of other more significant forces which might cause different orientations and balances. Such is a metaphor for postmodern men and women. Liberalism imagines that a freeing individualism and individuation must result in betterment for the individuals involved. This may even be true, but there is more to a person than that person themselves. An individual is a conduit of culture, society, and power. Through them, aligned with others, is the structure in which society rests, deploys itself, and dare I say, expires. There is an instinct of civilization, whether tribal or of higher complexity, to reassert itself and recreate itself in various iterations in order for the civilization to proceed. However, in our case I am speaking of organic civilizations. There could very well exist inorganic civilizations, but none which are guarded, tamed, and built by organic beings. Organic beings like ourselves will always give ourselves precedence over the inorganic, even if we do so kicking and screaming. Likewise, while many of our human family march towards the great ruining bottleneck of antinatalism, is it not but a base-level rejection of the current state of things? There are of course some happy couples who choose not to have children, but there are too those who will never couple. This is in essence, masturbation. Couples or individuals who purposefully do not procreate nor seek out a partner for procreation, are not maintaining their legacy. When they have intercourse, it is masturbatory, and a waiver from their duty as living, breathing beings. Masturbation is all an inorganic civilization could achieve, and for this reason one could compare antinatalism as inorganic. As man becomes ever more isolated from woman, his internalized femininity, in fem, must sprout outwards to compensate, for if not he would perish. Likewise, as a woman becomes ever more isolated from man, her internalized masculinity, in mask, must sprout outwards or she too would perish. These opposing internal essences, which are difficult to spell out, become aged, poorly seasoned, becoming rancid and marking sufferers with a distinctive energy. Normal people will avoid them, and should, which reduces their dating pool to the dregs. This is the result of a lack of other forces, leading to the weak effect of attraction of the internalized aspects of masculine and feminine conjoining in the individual. Such a person is either instinctually subverted or broken beyond regular repair. But why would they perish? As men or women are isolated, they age in abnormal ways. There is no push or pull, only the ceaseless drudgery of being alone or pining over the past. This might breed entitlement or envy, and so their development arrests. This further isolates the individual from their instincts, leading to resentment. Some cope through retreating to fantasy, whether gaming, masturbation, or masturbatory practices like having unproductive intercourse with a temporary or otherwise instinctually subverted partner. They will often get to periods of self-harm going as far as suicide attempts or even a completed tragedy. Death in their 50s and 60s is common, leaving the corporeal realm more than a decade sooner than their peers. It is a dark subject, a stark future, perhaps best exemplified by the opening paragraph of the unnamed narrator main character in Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground. Quote, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased. However, I know nothing at all about my disease, and do not know for certain what ails me. I don't consult a doctor for it, and never have, though I have a respect for medicine and doctors. Besides, I am extremely superstitious, sufficiently so to respect medicine. Anyway, I am well educated enough not to be superstitious, but I am superstitious. No, I refuse to consult a doctor from spite. That you probably will not understand. Well, I understand it, though. Of course, I can't explain who it is precisely that I am mortifying in this case by my spite. I am perfectly well aware that I cannot pay out the doctors by not consulting them. I know better than anyone that by all this I am only injuring myself and no one else. But still, if I don't consult a doctor it is from spite. My liver is bad, well, let it get worse." End quote. All our life plays out as a narrative of being. It is perhaps impossible for humans to live otherwise, and it is likely we cannot perceive reality itself outside of this framing. Man living without woman and vice versa is to live a narrative of solipsism. Together, the narrative characters contain the spirits of countless ancestors they could never have known, and the experiences they've had with those they have. These ancestral spirits arise as our unsubverted instincts, playing out in an, ideally, natural narrative drama in which we act our role with our partner. This partnership narrative should be an escape from the societal propaganda which continuously surrounds us, allowing for a sense of normalcy despite the chaos and subversion. In these gardens of narrative, we should find fruitful abundance, and thus springs natalism, the rebirth of the struggle for being, in the form of procreation and the raising of healthy children. The narrative partnership is like a battle, with two people building a stronger and stronger bond through real shared suffering and struggle. If they are victorious, they will build a relative empire. If they fail, then it will be despite their strength or because of their weakness. But how is an individual, with little experience, to know who would make a good partner for them in their narrative? Does a character know who will be best to venture forth with? No, such is done and organized by authors who compose a narrative arc, wherein the actors play their part. Should we author our own narrative? Perhaps some are capable, but many more are not. Who shall pair these types? Who shall organize these people into productive and meaningful stories? This is where tradition is invaluable. Older people who have acted in their narrative relationship, who have experienced the uniqueness of such a thing, should organize the young into fruitful partnerships. Parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, and godparents should do such work to help people figure this out. Not without the consent of the people involved, of course, assuming they are not subverted. We cannot truly train people for these plays, these roles. They must be learned and experienced. But with the proper attitude, it is possible. The process is natural. It should not be forced, unless there is subversion, in which case they can make arrangements to deal with that first. But some people are not worthy pairing with someone else because they are broken, and this will rob the other party of a potentially happy life. There are stragglers in every herd. Nature is brutal. As the parties to a relationship struggle together, they damage each other. This must happen and inevitably will, to some extent, varying in each particular narrative. This constant destruction and rebuilding keeps the male and femme, and the feminine and masc in check, keeping the wife feminine and the husband masculine, as balance requires for stability. Without this natural balance, the individual becomes an amorphous graying blob in maintenance mode, for the growth has been retarded and then halted. Subversion. Subversion comes in many forms. Some subversion is systemic, mass consumable food laced with hormones, plastics, and drugs. Birth control, for example, is a sort of brainwashing for women, for it alters their hormones, which alters their perspectives on reality and thus the narrative frame of their relationships. Chemicals in our water and food supplies likely have some sort of effect on our endocrine systems as well, and we can see through obesity rates, things have drastically changed in our population. Food is also simply less healthy than it used to be. What does this do to children? If you have been subverted, then they are being raised in an environment that to them is totally normalized, and thus, adapting to this requires subversion. Children are quite dysregulated in these situations. In a divorce situation, though not ideal, children can turn out fine if both parents work to be regular. Divorce stems from poor mate selection, and should be largely preventable, but even if reinstated, it is better to be from a broken house than to be raised in one. Cultural subversion attacks normal sex relations by interfering directly with mating narrative formation. By establishing one, normally the female, as a victim. This disables the female normative relations with the male, which allows the creeping of in-fem and in-masc into the dynamics as the feminine position goes unchallenged. This also brings more of the male and femme to sprout and grow, leading to an overly lunar scenario of perpetual darkness. The same but opposite effect is in the female, and the subverted wife will become more masculine. This creates a spiral which destroys the family unit, and if this happens for a long time, civilization itself. The solution is to embrace the instinct, regulated by custom and tradition. The subversion of our instincts becomes a twisted simulacra, a warped and unnatural compromise to postmodernity and liberalism. It is a spiritual murder-suicide, for an individual alone cannot contend with the world via spiritual solipsism. He or she must always be in a productive conflict, or our in-fem/in-masc will annihilate us, leaving us a neutered, gray, and sex-neutral soul, devoid of personality, happiness, fulfillment, generosity, kindness, or love. Subversion means we no longer act, but are acted upon as passive objects, and yet some claim that gives us objectivity, but nothing could be further from the truth.